first, and I really see like, we're doing so much practical stuff here also. Like really want to sort of dive a little deeper. But Ricky, maybe you can sort of take a step back and sort the landscape a little bit. If we're talking about AI and platform engineering, it looks like there are two perspectives, right? It's like, how can we utilize AI to make, the platforms better, right?
Mhm.
And also platforms for AI, right? There's a sort of two different things. Like how are you looking at this?
I am looking at it through those two lenses. So it's about how do we embed the AI product? How do we embed this Gen AI, these agentic models, all of this stuff that we're doing into the actual products that we're developing and make that faster? We have a lot of our clients, the clients that I'm working with, a lot of them see the AI models as kind of a bolt on. So they already have stuff in production and they just kind of bolt those things on. It really elongates the time to value the things that they're working. It adds complexity. How do we embed those elements directly into the product platforms? That could be through starter kits, that could be through actual platform elements that the developers are using, and they're embedding those models, both large and small language models, directly the into the products. So that's one lens. How do we accelerate that? The other one is how do we build platforms, developer platforms, internal platforms? How do we build those so that they're agentic in nature? So that could mean, hey, as a developer, I don't want to write a ton of YAML or CRDs. I would like for an agent to go do that. Where's the touch point for that? How do I actually embed that into the platform so that whenever I make a request for net new infrastructure, that's being done in a much more agentic way, right? Those are some of the areas that we're experimenting in. And then also, how do I democratize the platform through AI? Right? How do I make it accessible to more developers, more engineers within an organization? So a lot of the stuff that we're doing is how do I speed up some of the best practice adoption with Gen AI? So think about like, hey, we tell people at Thoughtworks to do contract testing. It's really difficult to do contract testing. Could I have an agent built into the platform that says, as I'm doing CI/CD pipeline work or as I'm building these things, hey, I'm going to give you the starter kit for packed testing as a part of that request. So we're experimenting with a lot of different things, but it does generally fall between in those two dimensions at a really high level. How do I use the platform to embed AI elements into the products I'm developing? And then how do I embed those into the platforms to speed up time to value, to have better engineering outcomes?
I have a ton of questions on both, and if you have, things you want to ask, fire off. But I would first like to zoom into the yeah, yeah. We have one question here from Taiji, if I pronounce
Hi,
this
yes,
correctly.
yes. Sorry, I can't, chat is disabled for me, so I can't actually look at what's in the chat. So apologies. So I have a question. So you mentioned agentic, super cool, and it seems like you're ahead of the game compared to many places. Um, I'm a bit, for me, agentic is when we start moving, when we have agents who are more independently operating. And
Mhm.
when you have an agentic ecosystem, you're going to have agents talking to agents. And obviously, we need to have the necessary guardrails about that. And I'd like to talk to you about the guardrails. But even before that, the examples you gave were very specific agents as opposed to agents talking to agents. Have you actually set up an environment where agents are a lot more autonomous? They actually work out what they need to do and are dynamically working out their sort of their plan and then talking to other agents.
That's a fantastic.
No, no, because of the second part of that question, or maybe with the first part. But when you talked about governance, great question. I agree that that's the ultimate goal. But when you talk about governance, a lot of our a lot of the clients that I'm working with and a lot of the experiments that we're doing, they want to have a human in the loop to not only provide governance, but to also provide guidance, right? So I happened to be in Seattle talking to one of the three large cloud providers. You can guess either one of them, either three of them, that the outcome will be the same. The while I was there, I came to this revelation that you actually have two operating models, even when you're talking about agents, if you're talking about using them as kind of code assistants. And it holds true even when you're talking about an agentic platform. So it's either an agent as a paired programmer. I'm from Thoughtworks. We love paired programming. So it's agent as this kind of assistant that's there where you're asking questions. And then you also have this agent as a second developer, right? Almost think about them as like a bunch of interns or a bunch of junior developers that you have. In both of those instances, the guardrail is you as the senior developer or as the person with the hands on the keyboard. So you want to have that governance layer. At least our clients do. They want to have that governance layer of I'm going to be there to provide the guardrails and the governance as a human in the loop until we build out much more responsible governance. Whatever that looks like in the next 6 or 7 months, I think it's coming pretty quickly. I will shamelessly plug the Tech Radar. It actually releases next Wednesday on April the 2nd. We talk a lot in the Tech Radar about AI governance for agentic models. So we've got a ton of research that we've written about that.
Can we maybe just put a pin in and say like what agent, like what's your, because I've just done the fun exercise of just looking at 4 or 5 definitions. They're all pretty different. Like what's your definition of an agent?
So it's for me, if you think about it's not a chatbot. It's something that's autonomous, that can respond to human interaction, that can go and perform a task and um, provide back a response, right? So that flow of the agent. So I'm thinking about it from a very flow standpoint, not necessarily a formal kind of like textbook definition, but that flow of, hey, I'm going to take input from some system that could be human, non-human. I'm going to I've got context. I'm going to respond by performing some sort of action, and then I'm going to provide the results back to that same interface. Um, with my LLMs, with my context, that's the agent there. So
So
I think it was Taiji that was giving that definition about agents talking to other agents. You could be using that, but we'd like to have a human in the loop to provide that feedback.
So if like to make a concrete example, so I'm in like an observability, I'm in a situation where I get a call and it's my manager saying like, hey, the service is slow.
Hmm.
I go to an interface, I say like, is there an incident in the banana service?
Hmm.
This reaches out to an MCP server with my incident management system. The incident management system, there's a query, it returns to me, here is one that fits, which is only one API call, right? Then I'm looking at this and then I'm saying, okay, is there a ticket? It will reach out to Atlassian and will say, yeah, there's a ticket matching. This could be this one. At this point, I have sort of 2 API requests. Does that mean I have 2 agents running, or do I have like,
Potentially, now that's an architectural conversation,
right?
right? So you could have one agent that is just called my observability agent, and it's orchestrating all of those things for you, and it's making all of those calls. You could have multiple agents there, right? One that's saying, "Hey, I'm only going to have the context of the Jira tickets, so I'm only going to be the agent for Jira." And you have to have another one that's saying, "Hey, I'm only going to be um, agent for honeycomb or whatever that you have." So those two could be single agents, right? So it in that particular instance, you could have those multiple agents and you could have MCP running on top to orchestrate across those agents and handle the context and context switching and be the protocol agent for that. I've actually experimented with both ways, this idea of multiple agents within a system or a single agent. It likens back to the monolith versus microservices conversation when you start talking about how would you want your agentic architecture to look like. I am of the belief, based on experimentations, things that we're seeing within the industry and things that we're doing on clients, that smaller agents are better. Smaller, more agents are better right now. I think that there's some things that provides you from a context perspective, from a performance perspective, and the ability because how the agent models are evolving, it gives you the ability to do fit for purpose on individual models.
Okay. So yeah. That one interesting observation is that so does it make sense? And you're all seeing that we're really like just it's not that we're making this up as we're going, but everything is so early on, so that it's very, very raw. But is it sort of make sense to say you have systems that actually write code and configurations, and then you have systems that are actually calling other third parties in sequences, right? So sort of
Mhm.
yeah, those are sort of yeah. So I've had a
So
conversation.
there's a separation between those two things as well, right?
Yeah, you would agree with that.
Yes, I do.
So I had a conversation with the founder of StackPack, I think. What's the name? Whatever, some sort of code generation tool, and they're actually training on organizational estates, and to generate Terraform files and stuff like this. And in like at this point, I think like 1.5 years or something, they're not able to get over an accuracy of 95%. So like in the world that I'm in, that's just like
Yeah.
not acceptable. Like
Yep.
right. So what exactly are we then supposed to use these things, sort of these code creation things for, if not like so where do you see the actual value if we can't really rely on them creating the configs?
So where I see the value so far is being able to create more of the frameworks for those configs and being able to create some of the initial uplift for it. So the idea of, hey, and to guide, right? Which is this idea of, hey, can you create me a CRD or a Terraform script that kind of looks like this, right? Or to have multiple instances of those things running at one time. So this idea of, can you give me 6 versions of what a Terraform script would look like to deploy an S3 bucket, an ELB, plus a Lambda service that's going to do this? And I might run that multiple times to create the individual cloud primitives. And then now what I get out is something that is probably 98% of the way there. And then all I'm doing is the last mile customization, right? I'm ensuring that the 5 to the less than 5% non-deterministic or non-functional piece actually works. I'd rather have that happening for infrastructure teams and for my platform engineering teams than them having to build and rebuild over and over. So that's one. So this idea of kind of acceleration, 0 to 1 acceleration on some of those tasks, I think that that's an area where it does play very well. The other area is on being able to take click ops. So we still have, I will say, my clients still will rely very heavily on kind of these large manuals of click this in the AWS console or click this in the different cloud consoles, and they want to move to something that is a bit more automated in nature. I think this provides us with the first step on, I'll take those documents, I'll run them through a platform agent. I'll look at the platform investments that you're already making from a cloud native perspective, and I can marry those together and start to provide you with some acceleration on what your net new environment looks like. But lastly, I think that there's also a really big place to look at it from a reading and querying the existing estate and existing cloud native infrastructure. That's the area where we've had the biggest lift that we've seen, which is, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of text that already exists to describe the current environment. That could be YAML, that could be kubectl configs, that could be any number of different things, Terraform scripts. And I need you to help me understand what the environment looks like. And then I'm going to continue to query and interrogate what that environment is. So it's essentially acting as my interface from the platform view into the actual cloud native infrastructure that's there. So those three have been really, really strong accelerators for value. And those are things that we as humans can do. It just takes us a really, 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 really long time.
Yeah, so this is interesting. I mean, the thing that I still continue struggling with. So I'm if I would be presented with two options. Option number one would be I have a good infrastructure team that so if my goal as a user is like I want to create an S3 bucket for production, right? Let's say that's the user intent. And I would be presented with two options as an organization. One option would be I have an infrastructure team that says like, hey, here are 5 default ways of doing this. We've really security vetted them. They're RBAC. People can sort of consume them, but they can't really change the underlying configs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my option number one. My option number two is I have some sort of thing auto-generate this, and then my security team has to review the code again, or I need to trust the policy checking mechanisms. I'm not sure. Like I would probably still tend towards the why don't we just set a template, right? Vet it once, and then maybe use LLMs to figure out what the human wants. The human says like, "Hey, I need a bucket for staging," and we can say, "Ah, okay, they mean like S3 bucket and click, 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 click for
Yep.
staging. The right template. Here you go." And just like my observation feels more secure, right? For now.
For now, certainly. For now, certainly, right? And so one of the things that we're experimenting quite a bit in as a adjacency, but it's similar to what you just described, is if I already have existing established if I already have things that are established as good practices, right? I've got a bunch of Java applications that I've seen and my team and my organization have said these are our gold standards. How do I turn that into something that the LLMs can read and then provide me with the parts and pieces for establishing net new things? So if I say, hey, here's how we want to do, observability in my Java applications with OTail. We have 5 or 6 different versions of that. And I say I want a new version of that, then I should be able to ask the LLM that's been trained on those good versions. Again, no shameless plugs for tools, but all of them have this ability to customize or do fit for purpose training with the models on code bases. I think in AWS Q for Dev, they call it customizations. I think in GitHub Copilot, they call it like post training or something similar to that. That I think is the unlock when you're talking about how do I leverage these models in the state that they're in now, particularly because determinism is an issue. And you don't want to spend a ton of time doing fit for purpose training, production readiness on developer, on developer platform models, right? All you want to do is just go to, Windsurf or Vertex from Google or any of these folks and just to take a model off the shelf and say, and point it at your repositories and point it at your infrastructure and say, tell me everything about this. And give me the best of what's there based on these conditions so that I can build new pieces of the infrastructure. And so what you're describing, Casper, is I think the middle ground that we're starting to see companies settle in. Oh, sorry.
Dave, you've just raised your hand now by writing this.
Okay, great. Good conversation, both Kaspar, Rickey, and I think it's a great service just to make this an open dialogue. So one thing, given all the things that you guys have discussed, and you've sort of zoomed back in and out of sort of fundamental limitations of the LLM.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a mistake, and I think Kaspar was alluding to it. Maybe it's a mistake to make an LLM the center of any architecture. Why aren't we putting control languages over LLMs, and then using a control language as a gateway to that LLM? And then I'm not trying to retroactively imply governance on something that naturally is not governable. I'm actually applying governance first, security first, determinism first, because I mean, really, in any Kaspar mentioned real world enterprise type customers. Yeah, I get it. A lot of these guys are doing experiments, but they're not going to put any of this stuff into production. I think they're very worried about, 90, when you hear these guys talk about 90, 95% accuracy, that's usually on a really good day. I mean, those are almost like rigged. So,
Yeah.
I mean, because there's actually reports that show how all the benchmarks are BS, right?
Yep.
That benchmarks are
Yep.
just, they're rigged. The LLMs train on them in advance. So it's like giving you the answers to the test before you take the test. I mean, it's all a bunch, and the more complex and the more steps and the more interrelationships, the worse LLMs do. So generally, when I've seen honest benchmarks, accuracy for complex enterprise grade tasks is like 30%. And you would never hire a developer that was 30% accurate, right?
Yeah.
So I think, so we operate on a basis that you put a control language and abstraction over one-to-many LLMs, and that's the way to do it. Give the in the context of a developer platform, give them primitives and building blocks over LLMs. Don't do it on a one-off LLM basis. You'll want to shoot yourself.
Can I no, Ricky, please.
Go ahead, Kaspar. No, I was just agreeing emphatically.
Yeah, so can I show you one architectural proposal that I thought of? And it's like it's completely anonymized, so it's not. It's really just to try to answer that problem actually. So after spending a ton of time of this lately, like my thoughts are like pretty much the following. So you have some sort of consumer here, who's consuming wherever, right? So in the IDE, in Teams and Slack, whatever. And so you could design it in a way where you say, okay, there's a request to some sort of backend or like programmatic language, as you just said, Dave. And then this sort of consolidates a context and sends the context to whatever model there is. And there will be different models, like whatever is currently en vogue. It returns then some sort of deterministic path, which I think is sort of important, right? The thing we can use it to pick something, but the thing that we're then executing has to be deterministic. It then uses Ricky's human in the loop thing to say, hey, by the way, this is what I would like to do. Can you authorize this? And then comes something that I think is super important. It's asking for permissions. It's checking your permission set. And then it assumes the user's permission. Because I don't think we ever want to have a situation, or like not at the current accuracy, where the LLM goes off and says like, hey, I have my
do stuff.
Yeah. So the system should have the thing, and then this backend, whatever this is, calls those paths, which are pipelines or whatever, to then query or edit or whatever across any other tool. So this is something that would combine those things pretty neatly. Yeah. Anyhow, this is just something I thought.
No, it looks really good, except that question mark is going to be really important.
Yeah. What is that? What is that box? What is the context of that box? What is the context of that box?
In here, something happens.
Yeah.
And no, but actually, it's spot on. And honestly, I think the thing is, it almost instantly gives you an LLM is just an API call. Right.
It's just
and it's one or more LLMs on premise, in cloud. Who cares? Domain centric. Generic, what have you. And you're essentially making. I'd call that a question mark an abstraction, right? It's some abstraction, right? And then that could be implemented at varying degrees, but that's all that really matters. That you have some abstraction between the user. And the which could actually be an agent, and the LLMs, and I think that's the path to a more sane, practical, scalable, approach. But again, good conversation, and I'm glad to hear like-minded folks.
And Dave, I will say this. I do this all the time. I take for granted the context that I'm having conversations with about the experiments that I'm doing and those things. And you said something that was an unlock for me, which is about the domain that you're doing these experiments in and the gate that you're doing. Most of the experiments, I talk about this like agentic platform in this very wide ranging way, but the experiments that we're doing are very focused on very small, finite, bite-sized things, right? So when we say, hey, we're going to be doing um, creating AWS Lambdas, that's all we're doing as an experiment, which is, hey, we are just focusing on how do we speed up and improve a human's ability with LLMs to create fit for purpose AWS Lambdas, or to contextualize those AWS Lambdas, or to write very specific small chunks of code. So I think naturally we are providing some of that governance in some of the experiments that we're doing with our customers by being extremely hyper focused on one task and not asking these LLMs to go and write an entire, front end architecture for, deploying, a Next.js application. Or, hey, I'm going to need you to write me a 700 microservice trading platform, and I need all the infrastructure for it as well. I think by proxy of contextualizing those conversations with the LLMs about, hey, I just need you to just answer questions about contract testing or these very specific things. I think that is where we can kind of train these individual agents on that particular task that we want to do, and then just provide the governance. But I think at a larger scale, what both you've discussed and what Kaspar has shown is the actual important part, that if we're going to widen the aperture and we're going to just have these agents that are just kind of like in our environments doing things, we have to have a much more standardized approach. And I love the tagline of LLMs as APIs. I think that that is exactly the direction that the industry needs to be moving towards, because it provides you with a framework to have conversations about how am I deploying these things? What is the domain? What is the actual data context for those things?
If I could just chime in really quickly, because again, good point. So I don't mean to chase it, and I'll stop from here. But I think that I think targeting your domain so you can make something tractable makes sense at this stage. I'd say almost experimental, but the problem is we've seen this show before, right? This is microservices now. Now we're like in
Yes.
actor theory and microservice. You're going to have an explosion of custom agents
Yep.
that you now have to
Yes.
maintain. So that question mark in Kaspar's drawing, that abstraction layer,
It's extremely important. And
is crazy important. It becomes the reusable asset across these micro domains, so that you don't create all these custom agents that you're going to be a slave to for the rest of your life. I mean,
Yep.
most of the large enterprises that I work with have failed at microservices, right? They fail. Lambda.
Dave, is this just another side? We apologize multiple times. James Lewis and Sam, they apologize and say, we should not have, if we knew what we were opening, we would never have written microservices, the article on Martin's site or the book. They openly apologize. I hope we don't become the same kind of apologist in 15 or 20 years.
Well, we can learn from history, right?
Can we? We have a question from Edmund, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Kaspar. For my question, I think it would be helpful for you to share your diagram again. I will base my conversation off that, if you don't mind.
Sure, let me dig this up again. Yeah. Let me make it larger for you.
Okay, yeah, it's coming up. Okay, thank you. So Rickey, this is the question I have for you. So the first question is, what has been your experience in terms of enabling enabling a solution or enabling platform engineering teams within their IDP to support MLOps workflows, from data preparation to training to model generation and inference? That's the first question. Let me provide you context to that question. The context to that question is coming on from the sentiment that while build an internal development platform when you can just adopt a readily available solution, right? Because if you look at, take for example, Bedrock or Vertex or any of these guys, yes, you need to build internal golden paths for your own internal engineering teams, but that has an advantage. But why reinvent the wheel, right? So if you've seen internal development platform engineering teams that are building IDP to support MLOps workflow, apart from building microservices, that's the first question. I don't know if I should just say all my questions. I have 3 layers of questions, right?
Let's answer the first. Let's answer the first one
Kaspar.
first.
Thank you.
Let's answer the first one first, because the first one is something that I have heard, have experienced firsthand. And I think your first question actually has 2 parts to it. So one is the idea about what you described, which was like, why would I build on a new IDP if I'm just using kind of like AWS Bedrock or Vertex or whatever Microsoft has. I mean, I always forget about Microsoft. I don't know why. The answer to that is that if you don't do that, you're treating those. It's the start of the old what was it? Pets not cattle conversation, where now you are creating, because if you think about it, those tools are just cloud primitives but now with the fancy dress of an LLM on top of it. So what I actually want to do is to continue to build fit for purpose abstraction layers on top of that to do the MLOps, right? So why would a developer that's creating an ML application need to know if this is running on a bare metal Kubernetes cluster that's supporting Airflow and some custom models, or if it's running on AWS Bedrock, or if it's running on Vertex, right? They actually don't care about that. What they care about is, I've written this, I needed to be maintained, I needed to actually do what I needed to do, and I needed to get into production, right? So this idea of there's a difference because now I'm running these workflows and I'm interacting with LLMs, I think it's a fallacy that I'm starting to hear more and more. And we need to, as an industry, we should continue to break that fallacy and say, no, this is no different than if I was trying to run Java Tomcat code on an EC2 instance versus now running Spring Boot code on a Lambda or on top of a EKS cluster. Right? There's no actual difference in the interface that I'm providing to the developers. And I certainly wouldn't want a majority of my developers to have all of that, access, right? I want them to have access to the things they need to have access to. And that's the same thing from an MLOps standpoint. And the same reason why I would advocate, and I tell clients this all the time that I deal with, that your data and your developer platform should support both data workloads and normal compute workloads. So I think we're moving down the path of making sure that there is workload agnosticism, and it doesn't matter if your compute workloads are being deployed from the same place as your AI and ML workloads, as long as they are getting to the appropriate place and you're able to route that using, CNCF projects or whatever you're using, right? I know that I read a paper recently about KQ or Q and how they do routing in CNCF projects. That's the types of things that we'd be doing, right? Hey, I just got infrastructure and I'm going to route it.
Awesome. So you've actually seen teams that are trying to support both types of workloads, data workloads. Okay. All right.
Yep.
My second question is, maybe even Kaspar could chime in, which is why I was asking for the diagram, is that when you look at the Humanitec framework of things, especially with the platform orchestrator, the Humanitec platform orchestrator, not every platform team building an IDP will want backstage because they're catering to developers first, right? So they don't want a GUI. They want probably like a CLI to start with, right? How have you seen agentic AI being embedded within the platform engineering IDP integration to optimize golden path workflows based on conversations?
Well, yeah. So Humanitec or not, I think this is not actually the question. The thing that I'm always preaching, and I sort of stand by this, is that you need to think a platform API first, because if you have an API, it doesn't matter what interface you put on top of it. Using orchestration for that is sort of one approach. There are many, right? I just want to sort of, for clarity, you could look at Syntha-Socratics in London. You could look at Radius. There are a good amount of examples in that space. Now, and this is sort of how I think about it. I think that for me, right, in all the tests I've seen so far, the LLM is an interface. Like, if I would need to describe it in one word for secure use in the enterprise, it is an interface to help you call APIs. So this is where I see this. So for me, we woke up one day and we, on top of UI, CLI, API, and code, we had a fifth interface, and that was now an LLM. And really strangely, this is sort of the revival of something that I thought would be gone forever, and that's ChatOps. Like, I guess we sort of will see like a wild revival of ChatOps in platform engineering.
Okay, good.
I-
And this
I agree with that. I'm just gonna again emphatically agree.
yeah, just to be conscious of time. This is my last question, Kaspar. This is for you. It's because your diagram really motivated me to really dig deeper into this, especially with the argument of microservices and monoliths, as Rickey did mention. So we may end up having either monolith agents or microservice agents, so to say. Now, this is a question about MCP, the new Anthropic MCP protocol for LLM to LLM conversation, right? Now, if you look at the top part of your workflow in your diagram, those are LLMs, right?
Yeah.
If you look at your question mark in a circle, that is a supposed agent that is supposed to run anywhere.
Good question. And I don't really think so. So I think that we need something. So yes and no. So let's put it like this. So MCP, if we're like really being very specific here, you could have, and for those who don't know, it's like model context protocol, essentially a way of keeping the model on the on a tighter context than the information of the entire world. Very, very much simplified. I think from everything I'm seeing right now, would be interested to see what you think, Ricky. This is probably the most powerful way of building at the moment. And so if you want to play with it, right, and you want to have a pretty fast stunt here, like you could literally do this in 2 hours. You take Visual Studio Code, you download an extension called Cline, CLINE, open source. And then you just install a couple MCPs, and you experiment. So the problem with this approach is that you need something that understands your estate, because you need to understand the context of how things fit together. If you don't have that, the degree of hallucination is very, very high. You can still do some things, but not a lot. The second big problem that I see is authentication. So you could sort of have like 10, 20 different MCPs that you servers running locally on your machine, but it means that you need to authenticate with a token with every single service against your local machine. And then something happens that is very similar to the human. Like, if the human developer has 20 tools, the human stops understanding in what situation to use what tool. the exact same thing is something that I'm observing with the models and the MCP servers. At a certain number from a certain number of tools onwards, like these things struggle to understand which MCP server to call for what situation, and then it sort of breaks down. And the better approach, that's why, is like you sort of, I'm with Ricky, you need to have some sort of central instance that is configured. That's why I'm saying this to your like Okta or SAML or whatever.
Mhm.
So it can manage your central authentication with those different tools and sort of acts like a agent gateway or whatever.
Like a broker.
Yeah, like a broker. Yeah, I would say so.
So
Yeah.
so I it's a bit of hyperbole, but I liken this to I think MCP is closer to, because if we're talking about microservices and all these different things, the analogy that I've been using to describe MCP to folks has been it's almost like the gRPC for service to service communication within the LLMs,
Exactly.
which is I've got a client, I've got a server, I'm building those things, and it looks and feels like a architectural pattern and accelerator architecturally for, hey, what am I going to do when I have all of these data sources, all of these different things that are just out there, just doing things.
And I'm sure
I, I,
they probably communicate only in vectors, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
which is
possible.
which is why I was trying to like ask Kaspar, because if you'll see Kaspar's diagram, the potential for agents to talk to a bunch of so many services, both existing inference APIs as well as the normal services that we use on the internet today, their APIs or the cloud infrastructure APIs. There will be so many. And I guess it is dependent on every service provider of their API to release their own MCP server.
But that's done. That is already done.
Yeah,
And
that's
this is I would, if I would need to bet what's the standard, I would say that's the standard, because like I've tested pretty much everything. I've like and there are some that are just fantastic, like Atlassian. For like what it's worth, not always a fan of every single product they release, but that MCP thing, very, very well done. Um, Even the small ones have them. Like so, and it's frankly not super complex to build. Like you can get that thing up in, like I would say, give me 4 or 5 good engineers and I can get an MCP server for pretty much every tool production grade in 6 weeks. It's not a big thing. So all the big ones are actually.
Awesome. Thank you.
I've noticed that as well. And Catford, that's another reason, and then that's another reason why I kind of liken it to gRPC, right? It's part standard, part implementation guide, part kind of all of these different things, and there's going to be this ecosystem that gets built around it, right? Tooling, all sorts of different capabilities, and then I think about how does that enable platform team to provide any sort of services back to developer teams, product team.
One thing that I would be interested in, Ricky, so I've been testing this, and maybe I've done this for too long, but so I'm like in an environment that I've set up, and I have sort of incident management, ticketing, Slack,
We have a
everything.
very similar little sandbox. I've got mine set up too.
Exactly. So we have our little setups, right? And so I'm like using this, and then in my IDE on the left hand side I have the conversational thing, on the right hand side I have my CLI, and so and it's like I'm natural language. Sometimes it's really cool because it's grabbing information and that it's in the context, and so then the next tool can actually act on that context. But very often I feel like that CLI command that I can just go in and like bash this out. You said this thing, it's like a junior operations person that's really, really following the rules if you do it well. But
Yes. Yeah.
sometimes sort of a senior, I'm looking at this and going like, yeah, it's just very nice, but I don't want to work with a like very junior operations person that follows the rules. Like, I just want to have the CLI command. Do you have that same part?
I do the same. I do the same thing, which is why I split the modality between those two things, right? I may ask, so the modality may be, hey, in a given day, I might have 40% of the tasks that I might be doing if I had a large team, I would say, okay, I'm gonna write the user stories for those, and then I'll give those to some folks, and then I'll focus on these other harder tasks. And even with the other harder tasks, I may end up saying, okay, I'm gonna do a bit of research on these, and I'm gonna come up with a couple of different scenarios, and I'm going to ask myself some questions about, okay, will this work? Will this work? Will this work? So the idea that I have in my head is exactly what you've just described. Hey, those kind of junior level tasks, I'm going to go farm those out to a bunch of, code assistants and, whatever, and they're going to come, I'm going to run those, and they'll come back in a bit with some recommendations and some code, and I'll look at that and say, yep, these four PRs look good. Boom, I'm ready to go. For the other tasks, I'm doing all of this research, and I'm providing that research as a part of the context, and then I'm building that, and I need that LLM, I need that AI model, or I need that Gen AI coding assistance to act as more of a pair. I'm not going to be asking you to write any code, but I'm going to ask you to validate and to maybe write tests, or to maybe get me a starting point on, is this idea going to work? Have I missed anything? And that's a second modality that I'm using it in. And I think a third modality is starting to come up, which is going to be something specifically for platform engineers, which is going to be around the CLI, right? As we see more and more things like Warp Terminal come up, and some of these other tools start to provide AI capabilities within the CLI, I think we're going to start to see more and more things there, right? AWS Q4Dev released the CLI tool where you can now do that. Claude Code is running on the CLI. So I think you're going to start to see more and more of these tools introduce the CLI modality, which is, I think, to Edmund's first point, or maybe it was someone else that was talking about, hey, how does the CLI get involved? If we're not using Backstage, we're not using some of these other things, I think we're going to start to see a move towards that being a net new modality.
Yeah, I think, I feel strongly about this. Like, you want to be, the user should be in a situation where they can toggle to determinism immediately, right? So they
Yes.
and it literally,
Yes.
Warp has solved it so beautifully, where you just write and it detects the CLI command, and if it's not a CLI structure, then it will just leave you alone, and will.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, shameless plug for any UX or CX people that are on the call, I think that this is going to increase the need for kind of developer experience folks and UX folks, because I think it's going to unlock quite a different way of working with some of these LLMs and models.
Yeah. I've seen a few platform engineers, in conversations actually saying like, yeah, like, I'm super afraid. I thought platform engineering is the one thing that they wouldn't take from us. How do you feel about this? Like how much of a threat to the workforce is that?
I think about it generally, not even just from a platform engineering standpoint, but just generally in software engineering and software development. I may be taking a very optimistic view of this, but I don't think it poses that big of a threat at all. I think I think it was Dave that said it earlier. I think the idea that these things are going to be writing tons of code that's production ready for mission critical workloads is
Zero. Very
not in our lifetime, right? If someone said that I want to ride on a plane that all of the pilot software was written by a Vibe coder, I would not be riding on that plane, let alone, a train or anything like that. So I think we are significantly far off from that. I do think that it does, even from a platform, hey, I want to use a mission critical system where the entire infrastructure was written by a platform engineer that was vibe coding. I think that that's something that no one would actually be on board for. So I think that those things are really, really far off. But this idea of, hey, I want to prototype something. I just want to get some feedback on if this is feasible or not. And what normally would have taken 6 or so months from a feasibility standpoint could now take you, 3 days, and then you can throw that idea away and start on something else. I think that is an area where we're going to see some improvement on. And that's the area I think we need to be leveraging for, right? Which is ideation, faster prototyping, faster decision making, and then just expanded context, right? If I can now know based on in the IDE, I can get a prompt that's telling me what everyone else is working on, all the PRs they're working on, all of the infrastructure that's out there. Instead of having to switch context, I can pull that in directly into the IDE and have a model helping me to distinguish that. I think that those are things that are going to make software engineering and software development even more invaluable, right?
And I also think that we will probably end up with just more custom software, because I think that's something that's really, really required, and we will and we will use less off the shelf. So I would be not super surprised if the net demand for software actually increases, right? So the need for speed, right? And the expectation for how fast we ship, that will go up. Like people will, like slow delivery cycles is not something that people will accept anymore. But yeah,
I think that that's going to be the balancing act, which is if you're not already using these tools, and some portion, I think the general consensus is, well, why aren't you able to go faster? And it's like, well, I'm not using Cursor or Windsurf or any of these things. It's like, why not? The other developers are, and they're able to go super fast. And I think that is going to end up being kind of like the result of this whole conversation that we're having from an industry standpoint, is everyone believing that I can just go faster, which may or may not turn out to be true. I think the debate is still out for that around that. But then reframing that conversation about I'm able to do more is a much more interesting conversation, right? It's less about speed and more about volume and the extra stuff that I'm able to do, right? I think in the chat Dave said about inferences. That's something that I will be honest, I don't want to spend a lot of my time doing. And if there's someone else that's doing that, and even at 90% accuracy from an inference standpoint, I'd rather have that than me having to spend an extra 4 or 5 hours a day trying to draw those inferences, especially across extremely sprawling things. If I can just provide a little bit of context, I think that would be helpful.
Well, good. Famous last words. Rickey, thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight. Thank you, everybody,
Yep.
for the engaged discussions. Rickey, I'll see you in Vegas again. I've been
Yes.
to Vegas so much, 4 times last year, and now finally the season starting again.
Yes.
Whoever is in Vegas too, I'm sure we will also do a roundtable there. Are we?
I believe we are. Yes, we are. And
Amazing.
I will be in KubeCon EU next week as well. I'm in Denver now, but I will be flying out to London. So if anyone sees me wearing gray or blue blazers, you can definitely stop me and tell me how I'm wrong.
Yeah, very attractive blazers. So look out for them. I'll not be there. Also super glad for that. Anyhow, wish you a wonderful day, wonderful night. See you around the world and in the next meetups. Thank you very much for joining, and see you very soon.
Yes.